Hi there, it's Cathal O'Neill, and today's date is 29th of March 2025. And I wanted to come on here to speak about some current issues that are arising in the wider world and society at the moment, particularly here in Ireland and in Europe. And the reason why I'm doing it is because it's quite alarming, and I can foresee one particular outcome or result of continuing down this road. And that's what I want to highlight today and put forth an alternative option that we can begin taking. And it comes off the back of Christine Lagarde, the head of the ECB, European Central Bank, saying, not last week, I think the week before last, that, and they've been going down this path for a while towards a central bank digital currency or a digital euro, which they hope to put forth towards the end of this year. October time is when they hope to have it out into circulation. And I would just like to speak about the dangers of central bank digital currencies and what that could potentially lead to. In another pretty prominent case that's ongoing here in Ireland, there's a school teacher, Enoch Burke, who has been in court for the past year and a half or so, over not, he's a school teacher and he refused to use pronouns, transgender pronouns, which was well within his constitutional rights to not do so, and within his religious um, beliefs. That aside, I'm not going to speak into that at the moment. Um, but what has happened over the last week is that he has had 40,000 euros worth that were in his bank account seized and taken. And these two are related in some sense. And I'm going to talk more about money and what it is because it's, while there are serious issues in the world at the moment and in the public domain, whether it's immigration, the cost of living crisis, and so on and so forth, nobody's, not too many people are speaking directly to the core root of this issue and the problem, which is a monetary system that we are engaging with and have been in the experiment of for the last 20, 30 years here in Europe and further longer with the US dollar. And the reason why I want to get into this is because I want to paint a particular picture in terms of the outcome of following this road down the digital euro and the potentialities of what might happen and occur um, if that is rolled out. So here in Europe, we obviously use the euro and we have cash and credit cards and debit cards. And the thing with cash is that it's anonymous. You know, you can use it anywhere and nobody can really trace it back to you. You can trace back credit cards. You can um, observe transactions, and you are being observed and you are being watched in terms of kind of where you're purchasing, why you're purchasing, what you're purchasing. And as we see with the case of Enoch Burke, in terms of his money being seized, any money that you are storing in a bank doesn't necessarily belong to you. One, the money isn't likely there because of the fractional reserve banking system, that any money that is deposited within a bank can be loaned out. Um, so they're only required to keep about 10% of that on their balance sheet. So 4,000 from 40,000. And I would safely say that most banks don't even keep 10% of what is deposited. So of the 4 grand that they'd keep of that 40,000, even though it's not going to the banks, it's probably going to the courts. But let's just say that 40,000 is in the bank when he deposited initially. The 4,000 that's there will stay, but the 36,000 will be loaned out from the bank, which creates an extra 36,000 out of what? Out of nothing. So an extra 36,000 comes into circulation because the 40,000 is already on the bank's books, but they've loaned it out and created an extra 36,000 euros from that. And whoever takes out that loan has to pay it back with interest. So they have to, you know, earn more money than the 36,000, find that money from circulation in order to pay off that loan. And so with the fractional reserve banking system, what that does is it inflates the monetary supply. And 40,000 is very little amount, but they're doing this with millions and millions and billions of euros. And we've seen a lot of money printing and inflation happen from COVID, from the '08 crash, from bailouts, and previous to that as well. I think in the last 4 years, I think about 80% of the dollars that are in circulation have been printed in the last 4 years since COVID. So what that does in terms of the purchasing power of every other euro in circulation is that it debases it. So it dilutes the currency, it dilutes the money system, and it decreases the purchasing power of the euro or the dollar um, over time. In 2022, the inflation was about 10.5%. They say it's gone back down to 2%, but those figures are highly manipulatable and they can kind of hide the actual inflation rate. I saw a figure during the week that the actual inflation rate kind of year on year for the last 100 years is about 14%. So if you have your savings in your bank account each year, you're losing 14%. Even if it's in high interest yield savings account, you might be losing 7, 8% of that purchasing power that you have. So over 10, 15, 20 years, the amount of value that that money holds has been drastically reduced. The repercussions of that are are many. There there are a lot of repercussions for that, and the knock-on effect. Obviously, the cost of living rises as a result, and people seek to blame producers, blame, point fingers anywhere else but at the currency and the banking system, the fractional reserve banking system. And the reason why they can do this, is because the euro or the dollar, they're not pegged to any hard assets. So going back into the middle of the last century, we had the gold standard. And while it wasn't perfect, you could redeem your cash for gold. You could walk into a bank and exchange your money for the equivalent amount in gold. And inflation was about 2% because the gold supply coming in every year is about 1.7% to 2%. Since we've gone off the gold standard since 1971, and prior to that as well, there is nothing backing the currency. It's what's called fiat currency, and fiat simply means ruled by decree. So the euro, dollars, and pound, and all these currencies only have value because the government says so. and it's backed by the threat of imprisonment, the threat of violence, and so on and so forth, and the threat of seizure. And we have, as humanity, this collective hallucination that the paper that you hold, the 50 euro note or whatever, has value, even though that piece of paper is worth cents, to print. So it's not a hard asset. It's very easy to get. It's very easy to make by printing more through loans and debt. And that's why the current system has in assets is about 450 trillion dollars worth um, in assets, even though the assets themselves, say if it's a house, that house isn't necessarily gaining value over time. It's not becoming, um, as I said, more valuable by its presence or by what it can do. It is simply the fact that the euro or the dollar, the measuring tool that we use to apply that value, is being debased, is is being devalued. Hence why the value is seemingly going up. But in reality, it's the euro or the dollar, the measuring tool is going down in value, is losing value. So the potential issue I foresee, and many people see, coming down the line with the central bank digital currency, which would be a digital euro issued by the European Central Bank that will be connected to your phone or your wallet, kind of digital wallet that you'd have, is similar to the case with Enoch Burke, in that if you, you know, post something on Twitter or Facebook that is inciting hatred or hate speech or whatever with these new hate speech laws that they want to push through as well, that the money in the quote unquote money in your app, in your wallet, can be shut off. You could go to pay for something in the supermarket and that be prevented or stopped because it is traceable. It is um it will be managed on a centralized ledger with everybody's accounts visible and tracked back or traced back to your name, your address, your PPS number, your social security number, and so on and so forth. So we're already seeing this, that the money in your bank isn't necessarily your money, with the case of Enoch Burke. And I've seen many videos of people walking into banks wanting to withdraw their money and not being allowed because it's in excess of a certain limit, or because they don't disclose what they want to withdraw it for, even though it's their money, so to speak. So, in that case, if everybody was to go and withdraw the money from their bank account, everybody would soon realize that the banks don't have their money. It's not, there's far more digital euros in circulation than there are cash reserves already. We're not too far from a digital euro as it is with the debit cards and credit cards. So this is the huge, huge red flag, and it's a huge potential problem. And even in the past, gold wasn't necessarily safe. Because in America, they can't remember the year right now, but they seized people's gold. It was a $10,000 fine, or you go to jail unless you turned in your gold. So gold isn't necessarily um, the safest bet either. And I'm going to get into Bitcoin in a second and why I view that as a really sound alternative to this system, the monetary system that we're currently in. Um, but I just want to highlight the point again of the money in your bank not being your money. Christine Lagarde, the head of the ECB, again in the last couple of weeks, has openly said that they will seize unused savings to invest within the European Union for whatever reasons or for whatever investments. So any accounts that have been, that have savings in them but have been unused or untouched, that they will begin seizing those euros. We've already seen this happen in China, where they rolled out a central bank digital currency that was connected to your social security scores. Um, so you know, if you fail to live up to their new expected laws or regulations around speech and communication, that they decreased your social score. And if it dropped too low, you couldn't use public transport systems, as an example. So the central bank digital currency is all about control, control and manipulation of people. And the alternative to that at the moment is what I'm seeing is Bitcoin as a form of money, as a form of currency that's a hard asset that is the soundest money that humanity has ever found or created. And the the form of money of currency has always evolved. Better monies have come into circulation, and the older monies just, they lose their value. They lose their usability. And this is what we're seeing right now. We're transitioning from this fiat currency into back into sound money, back into hard money again. So in contrast with the unlimited supply cap in the dollar and the euro, because they can print as much as they want and dilute and debase every other euro in circulation, which is why the standards of living are increasing, but wages aren't keeping up to that. In contrast to that, Bitcoin has a hard cap supply of 21 million Bitcoins that will ever come into circulation. About 95% of them already in circulation. So close to 20 million, about 19.8 million Bitcoins are already mined and in circulation. And Bitcoin itself as a technology is a decentralized ledger that is run by thousands and thousands of computers and nodes around the world. And these computers and nodes verify and update the ledger every 10 minutes. So the network itself is audited every 10 minutes. It logs all the transactions, it logs all the approved transactions, and creates this kind of block that is mined of all the transactions that were issued in that 10 minutes. Within that, new Bitcoin come into circulation every 10 minutes as well. And the current supply is 3.125 Bitcoin comes into circulation every 10 minutes. And there are computers, there are miners that are hard at work. They cost a lot of energy, a lot of money, which is the price of of mining. They attempt to solve an equation, and they're competing against every other miner to solve this equation to gain the block reward, which is 3.125 Bitcoin. The current price of Bitcoin is about 80,000 euro. So be, let's say, 270,000 euro, just rough maths. Um, 250,000 euro. Um, and that's the block reward every 10 minutes. In addition to this, the Bitcoin technology itself is peer-to-peer money. So there's no third parties involved. You don't need credit card companies to process payments. You don't need banks to store your money. Once you purchase your Bitcoin and take it off the exchange that you can buy it on and store it in a really safe place in a hard wallet that's disconnected from the internet, you're the only person with access to that. So you essentially become your own bank. That becomes your little vault, your bank vault. And you can use that to store your money to save it, or you can use it in exchange as money. And that's becoming a lot easier to do, and it's becoming more widely accepted around the world. The beauty of Bitcoin is one, you have sole ownership and sole authority and sole responsibility for your amount of Bitcoin. You own that property. Bitcoin is property. It's digital property. It's a hard asset with that 21 million supply cap that can't be changed, because to change that you'd have to override 51% of the network and get everybody to agree that this is, we're changing it. And that's nigh impossible to do right now. Um, and will be into the future. Nigh impossible. So the network itself is quite secure. But that 21 million Bitcoin it's a magical number, because with that hard cap in the supply, as less and less Bitcoins come into circulation, so as I just mentioned, the block reward of 3.125, every 4 years that gets cut in half. So we had one last year in 2024 where the block reward went from 6.25 to 3.125, and that'll be halved again in 3 years' time. So 1.6 or 1.7 Bitcoin will come into circulation every 10 minutes. By the year 2034, 99% of all Bitcoins will be mined and in circulation. The last 1% will take another 100 years, roughly, to come into circulation. So the Bitcoins themselves are going to become more and more scarce. And that's the key thing here, is about the scarcity of the asset. Euros and dollars, they're not scarce. There's loads of them in circulation. They're really easy to get. Bitcoins, on the other hand, are scarce. While they're easy to get right now because you can exchange fiat for them, in the future, nobody will be willing to take euros or dollars for the Bitcoin, because the euros and dollars will be worthless. So the Bitcoins themselves are going to appreciate in value instead of depreciating in value. So not only can it be used as a currency, as peer-to-peer exchange, can be used as a way of saving and investing long into the future. So instead of having 10,000 or 100,000 or a million in your bank account just sitting there, losing value, you could have 10,000, 100,000, million, billion in Bitcoin sitting there that you have access to, but that over the next 10, 50, 100 years, 1,000 years, is going to continually appreciating in value again because of the tool, the measuring tool that we have for the euro or the dollar. There's no supply cap on that. There's no limit in how much they can print with that. So there's no limit in terms of how much Bitcoin can be worth. And that's a big thing to kind of grasp. And you realize, wait a second, Bitcoin itself is a completely separate ecosystem. It's a completely separate form of money, form of currency to the euro or the dollar. There's a common saying in Bitcoin circles that one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. Doesn't equal 80,000, 100,000, or $1 million or euros, whatever. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. You don't have to get one Bitcoin. Each Bitcoin is divisible into 100 million smaller units. So you can get you know, 0.001 of a Bitcoin to start with. So returning back to my first point about the digital euro and the control that's kind of inherent within that system and the ability for the central bankers to seize your assets, as we've seen in the case that I outlined already. That becomes very, very, very difficult to do with Bitcoin. And so as a sovereign individual or a sovereign family or a sovereign community, that offers a different alternative to the fiat system, to the digital fiat system that we currently have, where you become responsible, you own property that's a very, very scarce and hard asset. And you're protecting your wealth, you're protecting your time, your energy, your value, your worth. And not only protecting it, but ensuring that it continues to grow and grow into the future as it becomes scarcer and more valuable. So that's the essence of what I wanted to outline, I guess, today is the kind of two roads that we're now confronted with and will be confronted with in the future in terms of where we go as a global economy, as nation states, as families, as individuals. And the choices we make now impact and determine the route we will be going down. One being authoritarianism, totalitarianism, surveillance states, and money not being yours or, not being property that can easily be taken away or you can be disconnected from that system. That's one outcome. The other one is freedom, is self-ownership, self-responsibility, cooperation, exchange, honesty, transparency. Not being stolen from, not being lied to, not being cheated within that system. So it'll be very interesting to see what unfolds over the next number of months and number of years as we see this play out on the world stage. Because now it's not just individuals and families and, eccentric groups choosing Bitcoin. It's companies, corporations, nation states now choosing Bitcoin to secure their wealth long into the future, to as a hedge against inflation, as a hedge against monetary debasement and devaluement. And so if you're an individual watching this or you have a family and you want to begin creating a legacy that lasts long beyond you, I ask you, which of those two options would you be inclined to choose? And I'll leave that with you. And I do hope to do more videos on this as I just kind of just feel inspired to do so. And just to bring more conversation to the root, the true root of so many of the issues that we're seeing in society at the moment, um, which goes back to the monetary system that we're using. Um, and I just finished on this point because it's really something I've been really sitting with for the last couple of years, is that money, the currency we use, is an abstracted form of our time and energy as humans. We exchange our labor, our time, our intelligence for currency, for money. So it becomes an abstracted form of our time, energy, value that we can then use for other goods and services in exchange. But what happens to the human spirit, human soul, when we engage in a monetary system that debases, devalues, lies, cheats, and steals? It perpetuates dishonesty. It perpetuates debasement of our values. And as we've seen in the past, empires and states that have gone down the road that we are currently riding now, which is inflating the monetary supply, debasing the currency, devaluing it over a long period of time, inevitably collapse. Their currency goes to zero. And that's the trajectory we're on currently. But we are fortunate to have an alternative. We have a way out this time around. And then my question became, well, what happens to the human spirit, the human soul, when we engage in a form of currency, a form of money that doesn't lie, doesn't cheat, doesn't steal, but is honest and truthful, and not only protects your wealth, but gives you back more. It grows in value over time. The scarcer it becomes, the harder it becomes to acquire. And that's another interesting thing to think about and to contemplate, because the values inherent within that system, the values inherent within our spirits and our souls are magnificent, are incredible. So that's what I leave you with today. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.